A billionaire catches his maid's teenage daughter washing dishes at 2:30 a.m., and the secret driving her to that sink will force him to confront a debt he never knew he owed. The house on Ashford Hill was the kind of quiet that made money feel useless. No parties, no staff chatter, just the low electrical hum of appliances and the distant tick of an antique clock counting down another night Vincent Harlow couldn't sleep. He tightened the belt of his navy robe and stepped out of his study, the blue glare of his computer screen still burning behind his eyes. On paper, he had everything. Towering glass buildings in 3 countries, a real estate empire worth more than most small nations. But at 2:30 in the morning, all that power couldn't buy him a single hour of rest. He moved through the corridor on autopilot, bare footsteps soundless on chilled marble. Insomnia had turned the mansion into a private museum. Long halls, expensive art, no witnesses. Most nights, he wandered until exhaustion finally overruled his thoughts. Tonight, something interrupted the routine. A faint sound, too small to belong in a house this big. Not an alarm, not a door. A tiny clink like porcelain kissing steel. The soft rush of running water. The wet, nervous rhythm of a sponge working faster than it needed to. Vincent stopped. Every instinct that had ever told him when a market was about to crash now told him one thing. Someone was awake in his kitchen who should not be. He followed the noise down the hallway, past the dark dining room, still smelling of expensive wine and overcooked charm from the evening's business dinner. Security was airtight. No intruder had slipped past his cameras. That left only one possibility, an employee, and one problem. There was no reason for any staff member to be working in his kitchen at this hour. Whatever waited behind the swinging door wasn't danger. It was a question. He pushed the door open with his fingertips. The kitchen was lit by a single strip of warm light over the industrial sink, turning stainless steel counters into long, dull mirrors. Towers of plates from the dinner were stacked in precarious columns. Crystal glasses lined up like soldiers awaiting inspection. And there, half hidden behind the mountain of dishes, stood a girl in a bright yellow shirt and black tie, sleeves rolled up, hands moving through the sink with the grim focus of someone who believed the world might end if she slowed down. Sophie Brennan, his housekeeper's daughter. 15. From behind, she looked small, swallowed by the scale of the kitchen. The yellow of her uniform didn't look like a cheerful choice. It looked like a hazard sign ignored too long. She was scrubbing a plate so hard the muscles in her forearms jumped. Soap foam climbed over her wrists. Hot water steaming around her like a thin fog. Vincent cleared his throat. The plate shot from her hands and exploded against the marble floor. For a split second, she just stared at the shards, frozen, as if they were evidence of a crime she couldn't afford to commit. Then she spun around. Her face was ghost white. Up close, the details hit him like data points. The shadows under her eyes were not ordinary teenage sleep debt. They were dark, heavy, almost bruised. Her hair was pulled back in a rushed bun, already coming undone. Her hands, still dripping soapy water, were red and raw, knuckles chapped from too many nights like this one. But it was her eyes that stopped him, wide, frantic, and packed with a terror that had nothing to do with a broken plate. "Mr. Harlow, I'm so sorry," she stammered, breath coming too fast. "I'll pay for it. I promise. I just wanted to finish up before." "Stop." His voice wasn't loud, but years of boardrooms had trained it to cut through noise. "Where's your mother, Sophie? And why are you in my kitchen at 2:30 in the morning?" "She's sick, sir," Sophie blurted. "Migraine." She felt awful leaving the dinner mess. She was worried you'd be upset, so I told her I'd cover. "It's fine. I'm used to late shifts. I just wanted to help." The words were too smooth, too ready. A script, not an explanation. Vincent let his gaze drift over the scene. The sink was a battlefield of dirty plates, sauce hardened at the edges. Pots from the caterer's line were piled on the side, each one the size of a car tire. There were enough glasses to stock a small bar. This wasn't a little favor a daughter did because her mother had a headache. It was a 4-hour job for a trained team, not a 15-year-old girl in cheap sneakers with holes starting to fray at the toes. "A migraine," he repeated. "And she sent you here, alone, in the middle of the night, to do her work? No, the answer came fast, sharp, too sharp. Her spine straightened, panic flashing into something like anger. She doesn't know I'm here. I have a key. I help sometimes. I just wanted it done before she woke up, so she wouldn't stress. She really can't afford to lose this job. There it was, the pressure point. Not his dishes. Her mother's job. You have school in the morning, Vincent said. Riverside Prep, scholarship program. That rang a bell. Her shoulders flinched barely, but he saw it. He always saw it. Reading tiny flinches was how he'd learned which partner was lying about their numbers and which city would quietly make him another 100 million. Yes, sir, she whispered. I'll be done soon. You won't even notice I was here. She turned back to the sink, as if she could simply rewind the scene and pretend he had never walked in. Water roared. Plates clinked. Her hands moved faster, almost frantic. From the corner of his eye, Vincent caught a detail he'd missed on the way in. A battered black backpack slumped near the service door. One zipper held together by a paperclip. A folded schedule from Riverside Prep jammed into a side pocket, edges soft for being handled too often. A math textbook bristling with sticky notes and highlighter stripes. On the top flap, someone had written her name in fading silver marker. Sophie. Scholarship kid. Top of her class. The kind guidance counselors quietly bet their reputations on. And here she was, working like a ghost at 2:30 a.m., hands raw, eyes hollow, lying through her teeth to keep a job that didn't even belong to her. Leave the dishes, Vincent said. Sophie froze. The water kept running. Sir, turn off the tap, he repeated. Go home. Get some sleep before school. If there's a problem with the kitchen in the morning, it's my problem, not yours. Fear clawed back over her features. Please, Mr. Harlow, she said, voice cracking on his name. If this isn't done, my mom could get written up again. If she gets written up again, she could. She swallowed hard, eyes shining. We can't afford that. I can handle it. Really? Vincent stepped closer, lowering his voice. You shouldn't have to handle anything in this house at 2:30 in the morning. You're a child, not unpaid night staff. For a second, he thought she might argue. Then the fight drained out of her shoulders all at once, leaving behind nothing but bone-deep exhaustion. She shut off the faucet. The sudden quiet pounded in his ears. Slowly, she untied the yellow apron, fingers fumbling with a knot, and laid it on the counter as though it were uniform she wasn't sure she was allowed to remove. She grabbed her backpack, slung it over one shoulder, and kept her head down as she slipped past him toward the door. Thank you, sir, she whispered, though it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like defeat. The service door sighed, shut behind her. Silence flowed back into the kitchen, thicker than before. The broken plate still glittered on the floor. Towers of dishes waited, accusing. Vincent stood in the middle of all that expensive mess, his mind doing what it always did, searching for the pattern. A maid's daughter with honor student textbooks in her bag, working 2 jobs in the shadows. Red hands, cheap shoes, a lie polished smooth from overuse. Fear that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with something bigger, meaner, hungrier. This wasn't just about a girl washing dishes. It was about the kind of pressure that could bend a child into believing that sleep, school, and a future were all acceptable collateral damage. For the first time in a long time, Vincent didn't feel like a man in control of his world. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a story already in motion, one that had been grinding the Brennan family down for years while he walked past them in his own hallways. He stepped over the shattered porcelain, turned off the lone strip of light, and headed back to his study. Sleep was no longer the goal. Answers were. By the time the first gray wash of dawn slipped over the treetops outside his office windows, Vincent Harlow had made up his mind. If a 15-year-old girl was quietly destroying herself to keep his house running and her mother alive, he wanted to know why. His first call, as the clock struck 8, would be to Riverside Prep. The second would pull every record on Eleanor Brennan, the quiet housekeeper he'd never bothered to really see. And buried inside those files, inside old court documents and lopsided medical bills, waited the debt Vincent Harlow had been running from for years, a debt he didn't yet realize had his own name stamped across the top. If this opening already hit you in the chest, don't just watch and scroll like Sophie is some movie character. Real kids are trading sleep for survival right now while you're safe on your phone. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this sacrifice explodes later, and drop a comment with the time and where you're watching from. If you can type 2:30 a.m. from your city in comfort, the least you can do is show you care enough to subscribe and comment. By the time the first gray light slid between the trees on Ashford Hill, Vincent's coffee had gone cold. He sat in his leather chair, elbows on his knees, Sophie's raw hands and hollow eyes replaying on a loop. A 15-year-old girl working like a ghost in his kitchen at 2:30 a.m. wasn't a coincidence. It was evidence. He'd built an empire by following evidence. He picked up his phone instead of his sleeping pills. The clock on his desk read 8:02 a.m. Normal people were just starting their day. Vincent felt like he'd already lived 3. He pressed a contact he rarely used. Riverside Preparatory Academy, headmaster's office. A brisk voice answered. "This is Vincent Harlow," he said. Years of boards and banks snapped into his tone automatically. "I need to speak with Dr. Patricia Wells." "It's urgent." There was a pause, then a flustered, "Of course, Mr. Harlow. One moment, please." He drummed his fingers on the armrest while the hold music played, a watered-down piano piece that made him think of hotel lobbies and wasted time. His gaze drifted to the window. The lawn staff were already at work, tiny figures moving across the wide green expanse. Somewhere beyond those trees, Sophie was probably dragging herself through her morning routine, pretending last night hadn't happened. "Mr. Harlow," a calm, authoritative woman's voice came on the line. "This is Patricia Wells. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about one of your students," he said. "Sophie Brennan." A beat. Then, yes. Sophie. Her voice softened fractionally, the way adults spoke when a child's name carried complicated weight. "What about her?" "I understand she's on a scholarship," Vincent said. "Academic, I assume." "Full merit," Dr. Wells confirmed. "Sophie was one of our brightest sophomores. Exceptional aptitude in mathematics. Focused, disciplined. Our scholarship committee was thrilled to have her." "Was?" Vincent's jaw tightened on the word. Another pause, less professional this time. "Mr. Harlow, may I ask why you're inquiring?" "Because at 2:30 this morning," he said, "I found her in my kitchen, washing dishes from last night's dinner, so exhausted she could barely hold onto a plate. I'd like to understand how that lines up with exceptional aptitude and discipline." A sharp breath slipped through the speaker. "She was in your home?" "She lives on my property," Vincent reminded her. "Her mother works for me. What's happening on my estate is my business. I'd appreciate something more than polite concern." Dr. Wells regrouped, her tone returning to its practiced steadiness. "Of course. Forgive me, I was just surprised. Yes, Sophie is one of our scholarship students. She entered Riverside last year, tested in at the top 3% in math and science. Her teachers have been extremely impressed." Present tense would be reassuring, Vincent said. He heard papers rustling. When Dr. Wells spoke again, her voice carried the reluctant weight of someone reading numbers they didn't want to believe. "In the last 6 weeks, Sophie has missed 12 full days of school," she said. "She's been late an additional 8 times. We've had multiple reports of her falling asleep in class. Her grades have dropped significantly. She was ranked 3rd in her year last term. She's now hovering somewhere around the middle." "And you didn't think to call?" Vincent's tone cooled. "We did." There was a note of quiet defensiveness now. "We contacted her mother 3 times. Emails, phone calls, a conference request. Mrs. Brennan assured us Sophie was just adjusting to some family issues and that things would stabilize." He pictured Eleanor Brennan as he usually saw her. Neat uniform, quiet efficiency, face composed into the anonymous pleasantness of someone who'd learned never to bring personal problems to work. Pride wrapped so tightly around fear that neither was visible from the outside. "And the scholarship?" he asked, though he already knew where this was heading. There was the faint click of a keyboard. "Our scholarship committee meets next week," Dr. Wells said. "Sustained academic decline and attendance issues are grounds for review. If her performance doesn't improve immediately," she didn't finish the sentence. "Then you take away the one ticket she has out of her life," Vincent finished for her. Understood. Mr. Harlow, Dr. Wells said quietly, Sophie is not lazy. Whatever is happening, it's not a lack of effort. When she's awake, she works herself to the bone. I've never seen a child so terrified of disappointing the adults around her. The image of Sophie in the yellow shirt flashed in his mind again, shoulders locked, voice cracking as she begged to finish a sink full of dishes that weren't even hers. He suddenly wanted to put his fist through the mahogany desk. Thank you, doctor, he said instead. That's all I need for now. Please postpone any scholarship decisions until you hear from me again. I can't promise. You can hold a meeting, he said, voice like steel sliding into place. You can also choose not to finalize anything until a primary benefactor has had a word with your board. I'll make sure they understand the optics of revoking a poor student scholarship while my name is on your new science wing. Silence, then a resigned exhale. Very well, Mr. Harlow. I'll note that Sophie Brennan's case is under review. He ended the call before his temper tempted him into saying something less controlled. So, the girl was burning herself out at night and watching her future collapse by day. 6 weeks of this, maybe more. Long enough for her teachers to see the change. Long enough for her mother to lie smoothly about family issues. Long enough for no one with real power to actually fix it. Until now, Vincent scrolled to a different contact and pressed dial. The line rang once. Harlow Estate Security, a deep voice answered. Mark, it's Vincent. I need you to run a background poll. Discreetly. Yes, sir. The chief of security's professionalism didn't crack. On whom? Eleanor Brennan, Vincent said. Housekeeping. I want employment history, financial stressors, recent medical records, if they're accessible. Any court cases in the last decade. And I want it today. Yes, sir. Is there a particular concern? There's a 15-year-old in my kitchen doing a grown woman's job at 2 in the morning, Vincent replied. That's my concern. Use the channels we use when we vet high-risk tenants. And Mark, sir, no one outside your team needs to know I requested this. Not HR, not household management, not Eleanor. Understood. There was the faint click of a pen. Understood. I'll call you as soon as I have something. Vincent hung up and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The pattern was taking shape, but there were still too many blank spaces. Sophie wasn't working herself sick for fun. This wasn't teenage rebellion. It was survival. The question was, survival from what? He tried to focus on the morning's calendar. Video call with a development partner in Dubai, a lunch meeting about a downtown acquisition, a foundation event his assistant claimed he couldn't miss, but every agenda item looked blurry around the edges. He canceled the lunch and pushed the other meetings back by an hour. By noon, his phone buzzed. Sir, Mark's voice came through, clipped efficient. Got that file on Eleanor Brennan. Go ahead. Eleanor Mary Brennan, 42. Widowed 5 years ago. Husband, Daniel Brennan, construction worker at Castellano Construction. Died on site, scaffold collapse. No life insurance policy on record. Vincent's grip on the phone tightened. Was there a lawsuit? Yes, sir. Wrongful death suit filed by the widow. Brennan versus Castellano Construction settled out of court about 4.5 years ago. Settlement amount was modest. Modest, Vincent repeated, acid in the word. Why? From what I can see, Mark said she was represented by a legal aid attorney. Overloaded, underfunded outfit. Castellano's corporate counsel dragged the case out, motion after motion. Looks like Mrs. Brennan took a low settlement to avoid it stretching into years. Numbers, Mark. Settlement. Just over $90,000. After legal fees and medical bills, she would have walked away with very little. $90,000 for a man's life. For a girl's father. For a woman's partner. Vincent swallowed the taste of something bitter. What about now, he asked. Finance. Health. She's been with the estate 8 years. Mark said. Excellent employee record. Never a complaint filed against her. But the last year, her sick days increased. Medical databases show she's undergoing chemotherapy. Stage 3 breast cancer. Insurance covers part of it. Out-of-pocket costs average about $3,200 a month. Her salary here? Vincent already knew, but he wanted to hear it. $3,800 before taxes. Mark replied quietly. For a moment, Vincent said nothing. The math lined itself up in his mind without mercy. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, basic necessities. Then a tumor the size of a fist, demanding more money than she made just to keep growing slower. Every missed shift, a financial wound. Every day, off work, a gamble with her life. No wonder Sophie's hands were raw. Anything else? Vincent asked. One more detail, Mark said. Paper rustled on the other end of the line. The law firm that represented Castellano in the wrongful death case? Harlow and Associates. The name hit like a physical blow. That firm hasn't been mine for a decade, Vincent said automatically, even as his chest constricted. Understood, Sir, Mark said, but records list the primary trial team as attorneys you worked with, partners you trained. Vincent ended the call without trusting himself to speak. Harlow and Associates. Once, that name had been his pride. It was the banner under which he'd cut his teeth, the machine he'd built from a 3-office operation into a national powerhouse before selling his shares and moving into development. He'd kept his name on the door because ego liked the illusion of permanence. Now the illusion was cracking. He pulled up his laptop, fingers suddenly too stiff for the keys. A quick search brought the case file onto his screen. Dense legalese, dates, motions, stipulations. Under Defendant's Counsel was the familiar logo. Under Plaintiff, Eleanor M. Brennan, on behalf of herself and her minor child, Sophie L. Brennan. He stared at the scanned signatures. Eleanor's handwriting was careful, almost painfully neat, as if she believed that writing her name clearly might make the system read her more kindly. It hadn't. He scrolled through the settlement terms. His former colleagues had done what they were famous for, crushed opposition under mountains of procedure until the other side ran out of time, money, or hope. It wasn't illegal. It was good lawyering. He felt sick. Somewhere between the last motion and the final settlement, a line had been drawn from a collapsed scaffold to a widow cleaning other people's houses, to a 15-year-old girl washing dishes at 2:30 a.m. so her mother wouldn't miss a shift, so their apartment wouldn't vanish, so chemo wouldn't stop mid-cycle. And stamped across every inch of that line, whether he'd been in the room or not, was his name. Vincent closed the laptop slowly. The numbers were merciless, but they told the truth. There was no way Eleanor's salary could carry both rent and those medical bills without something breaking. Sleep, school, childhood. The sacrifices had to come from somewhere, and the system had taken them from the smallest person in the equation. Sophie. He stood and crossed the room to the window. Outside, the sun was high now, flooding the estate in clean, indifferent light. The mansion looked perfect from this distance. Only up close did you see the hairline cracks. He thought of Sophie's voice in the kitchen, low and fierce. If this isn't done, my mom could get written up again. We can't afford that. He had assumed we can't afford that meant money. It did. But now he could see the other cost beneath it. Fear. The terror of losing not just a paycheck, but the thin thread keeping her mother alive. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent felt something unfamiliar tightening behind his ribs. Guilt, maybe. Or rage, sharpened not at some faceless corporation, but at the man in the glass. He turned away from the window and picked up his phone one more time. This call did not go to a school or a security chief. It went to a number he knew by heart, but rarely used anymore. Carson Law Group. A receptionist chirped. How may I direct your? Elliot Carson, Vincent said. Tell him it's Harlow. He'll take the call. A moment later, a smooth baritone came on the line. Vincent. To what do I owe the pleasure? Regretting selling us your old empire yet? Not today, Vincent said. I need you to pull a case for me. Brennan Castano Construction 2020. I want the full file. Internal memos. Strategy notes. Anything with my name on it. There was a slight, wary pause. That was handled through Harlow and Associates, if memory serves. Why the sudden interest? Because the widow from that case cleans my house, Vincent said coldly. And her daughter is working 2 jobs and flunking school to keep her alive. I want to know exactly how hard you squeezed them, Elliot. And I want to know today. Vincent, I'm not calling as a colleague, he cut in. I'm calling as the man whose name you used to justify whatever you did in that courtroom. You have until close of business. He hung up before Elliot could argue. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Pieces were sliding into place whether Vincent wanted them to or not. This wasn't just about a girl at a sink. It was about a chain of choices, his father's, his firm's, that had turned a tragedy into a slow-motion collapse for a family living under his own roof. He sank back in his chair, pressing his palms together. A billionaire catches his maid's teenage daughter washing dishes at 2:30 a.m., he thought, and discovers a sacrifice no child should ever have to make. He had the discovery. Now came the part he'd spent his life avoiding, confronting the debt. The second night, Vincent didn't pretend he might sleep. He went through the motions for appearance's sake, changed into a fresh shirt, let his staff clear away the remains of another hollow dinner, nodded at the security cameras that never stopped watching the grounds. But inside, every clock in the house seemed to be counting down to the same moment. 2:30 a.m. The first night, he'd walked into the kitchen by accident. This time, he was waiting for it. He sat in his study with the door half open, the desk lamp dimmed. The house washed in that peculiar pre-dawn darkness that made polished wood look like pools of black water. 2 manila folders lay on the desk in front of him. The report from Mark, his security chief, and the printed copy of the Brennan versus Castellano file his former firm had sent over in a rush, no doubt hoping to keep him placated. He had read every page. The settlement numbers, the timelines, the motions designed to bleed a widow dry with delays until she took whatever crumbs were offered. His name appeared 3 times, not as counsel of record, but as the man whose strategies had been cited as standard practice. Standard practice. A man died. A family was crushed. A 15-year-old girl was now working herself into the ground in his kitchen because a younger version of Vincent Harlow had been very, very good at his job. He'd built skyscrapers off the back of that skill set. Tonight, he was about to stand in a fluorescent-lit kitchen and watch where the debris had actually landed. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2. Then 2:30, the half-hour marked only by a dull, hollow clack inside the brass casing. Vincent rose. He walked the now-familiar route down the corridor, past the framed oil paintings and long-dead ancestors. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The soft sounds reached him before he pushed through the kitchen door. Running water, clinking dishes, the quiet, frantic rhythm his brain now associated with Sophie Brennan. He stepped inside. The scene was almost identical to the night before. Same yellow overhead strip casting the room in a tired glow. Same columns of plates. Same girl at the sink in her black shirt and yellow apron, moving like a machine set 1 notch too fast. The only difference was him. "Sophie," he said. She flinched hard enough to send a spoon skittering into the water, but she didn't drop anything this time. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes were ringed with even darker shadows now, like someone had deepened the bruises under her skin. "Mr. Harlow," she managed. Her voice was steady for exactly 2 words. "I'm almost done. I told you last night." He cut in gently but firmly. "You are not to be here at this hour." Her chin lifted with a stubbornness he recognized from the scholarship photo on her ID. "I wasn't finished," she said. "Mom's been slower lately. The chemo makes her tired. She can't keep up like before. If the kitchen isn't spotless, she'll get written up again." Sophie swallowed, working the knot in her throat down by force. "She can't lose this job, sir." Vincent took a step closer, leaning his hip against the opposite counter to put them at eye level instead of towering over her. "How many nights have you done this?" he asked. Her fingers tightened around the sponge. "I told you. I just started helping more because—" "Sophie," his voice sharpened on her name, not loud but absolute. "You are very smart. That's not in question. But you are a terrible liar." For a second, he saw something behind her eyes. Panic, calculation, the desperate urge to keep holding the story together. Then her shoulders sagged just a fraction. 6 weeks, she whispered. Maybe 7. The words dropped into the space between them like another plate hitting tile. "You leave your shift at the grocery store around midnight," Vincent said, not asking. He'd already had Mark verify her work permit and schedule. "You come here. You do your mother's job until 3 or 4 in the morning. Then you go home, sleep a couple of hours, and drag yourself to Riverside Prep to pretend you're still the girl they gave a scholarship to." Her eyes widened. "You called the school?" "I did." He kept his tone level. Dr. Wells is concerned. Your teachers are concerned. They're watching you fall asleep in class. Your grades are collapsing. The scholarship committee meets next week to discuss taking away your place. She flinched like he'd slapped her. No, she said quickly, breath starting to hitch. They can't. I'll catch up. I just need a little more time. Once Mom's better, I'll stop the extra shifts. I can pull my grades back up. You are ranked in the middle of your class now, Vincent said, gentler but unflinching. You were third. You've missed 12 days in 6 weeks. You're not eating enough. You're not sleeping. The only thing you're doing perfectly is destroying yourself. I don't care, she burst out. The words tore free before she could stop them. Her hands were shaking now, water flicking off her fingers onto the counter. I don't care about any of that, she said, voice rising and splintering. School, grades, stupid scholarships, I don't care. None of it matters if my mom dies. Do you understand? Nothing else matters. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious, one breaking loose to track down her face. She swiped it away with the back of her wrist, angry at the betrayal. Vincent stayed where he was, every instinct from boardroom battles screaming at him to take control of the conversation, steer it, shut it down. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was a girl standing on the edge of a cliff she hadn't chosen. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked quietly. Your teachers, the school counselor, me. Tell them what? She demanded. That we can't afford for Mom to miss a single paycheck? That the insurance doesn't cover half the chemo, and the hospital keeps sending letters with red ink on them? That the landlord doesn't care if she throws up all morning? He just wants the rent on time? Her laugh came out sharp and broken. You think they'd let us stay if they knew I was working 2 jobs under the table to keep us there? You are 15, Vincent said. You're not supposed to be carrying this. Well, I am, she shot back. Because someone has to. And it's not like the people who were supposed to care about my dad's life did anything, right? The company that let him fall off a stupid scaffolding went on like nothing happened. The lawyers said it was the best they could do. 90 grand for a whole human being. Her mouth trembled. Do you know what that feels like? Watching your mom sign papers that basically say your dad wasn't worth more than a nice car. The words hit him in the chest. She didn't know, couldn't know, how close to the bone she was cutting. Vincent drew a slow breath. This was the moment. The thin line between leaving the wound buried and cutting it open properly. I know exactly what that feels like, he said, because the law firm that fought your mother in that case was mine. Sophie stared at him. For a heartbeat, there was nothing in her face at all. No comprehension, no anger, just blankness as her brain tried to process syllables that refused to make sense. Then her features rearranged themselves, piece by piece. Confusion, disbelief, then a dawning horror that looked like someone had reached into her chest and twisted. What? The word was barely air. Harlow and Associates, Vincent said, the name sour on his tongue. I founded it, built it, trained the partners who handled your father's case. I sold the firm 10 years ago, but the machine they use on your family was one I built. That settlement? That strategy? That's on me. She took a step back, bumping against the edge of the sink. Her hands grabbed the counter behind her, as if she were suddenly afraid the room might tilt. So you're the reason. Her throat closed on the sentence. No, he said quickly. I'm not the reason the scaffold collapsed. I'm not the reason your father went to work that day. But I am part of the reason your mother walked away with barely enough money to cover a funeral and nothing to cover a life afterward. I trained people to win at all costs. You and your mother were the cost. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. The only sound was the soft drip of water from the still wet plates. Sophie's face crumpled, then locked itself again in the space of a breath. The way someone slams a door on a room they can't afford to look into. So what? She whispered. You came down here to apologize? To tell me you're sorry my dad was just a line item in your firm's victory file? That doesn't change anything. No, Vincent agreed. It doesn't. He straightened. The decision he'd been circling since dawn finally settling into place with the click of something heavy and irreversible. Which is why I'm not here just to apologize. He stepped closer into the full beam of the overhead light so she could see his face clearly. Not the billboard billionaire version from magazines, But the man who'd spent the night staring at court documents with his own name scrawled in the margins like a stain. "Here's what is going to happen," he said, each word measured and solid. "Your mother's medical bills, from the first appointment to the last treatment, are now my responsibility. All of them. The insurance copays, the medications, the scans, every cent." Sophie blinked, as if he'd just started speaking a language she didn't understand. "What?" she said again, but the word carried a different weight now. "Your mother's position here," Vincent continued, "will be converted into a full benefits package I should have offered years ago. Health insurance that actually covers what it's supposed to cover. Paid medical leave. Job security." His jaw tightened. "She will not be fired because she can't scrub floors fast enough while poison is running through her veins." A tear slid down Sophie's cheek. She didn't seem to notice. "And you," he said, his voice softening but not losing its edge, "are going back to being a student. Immediately. No more grocery store shifts. No more midnight dishwashing. No more trading sleep for survival." "That's not your decision," she murmured, but it sounded weak, almost reflexive. "It is when my negligence helped create the problem," Vincent said. "I spoke to Dr. Wells. Your scholarship will not be revoked. If you need tutors to catch up, we'll get tutors. If you need time, we'll take time. But you are not sacrificing your future to pay for a debt with my name on it. Not on my property. Not on my watch." Sophie's breath came faster now, small, shaky inhales like she couldn't get enough air. "Why?" she forced out. "Why would you do that? Out of guilt? Pity? Some rich guy crisis of conscience?" Vincent thought of his sister, pale and weightless in a hospital bed, while their father weighed treatment options against stock portfolios. Of the years he'd spent piling money on top of that memory, hoping the height would make it disappear. "Because some debts," he said quietly, "can't be paid backward, only forward." She stared at him, the kitchen's harsh light catching the raw, vulnerable edges she'd been trying so hard to hide. "You don't owe us anything," she whispered, but even as she said it, her voice faltered. "That's where you're wrong," he replied. "I owe you more than I can ever repay. But I can start with this: your mother's life, your education, your sleep. The things that should have been protected from the beginning." Her grip on the counter finally loosened. Her knees seemed to give up at the same time. Vincent moved on instinct, pulling out one of the metal stools by the island and guiding her toward it before she could hit the floor. Sophie sat, hands hanging uselessly in her lap, tears spilling now without permission. Quiet, helpless sobs shook her slight frame. "I've been so scared," she choked out. "I thought if I just worked harder, if I just stayed awake a little longer, I could fix it. I thought if I dropped the plates, Mom would die." "You are a child," Vincent said, the words carving into him as much as into her. "You were never supposed to fix it." He stood beside her, one hand braced on the counter, the other hovering awkwardly near her shoulder before he finally let it rest there, a light, steady weight. For a long time, they stayed like that, a billionaire and a dishwasher, a man and a girl bound together by a chain of events neither of them had started, but both of them were now trapped inside. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale. Another day was creeping up the hill. "This changes everything, you know," Sophie said eventually, voice hoarse. "If Mom finds out, she'll say no. She hates taking help. She still keeps Dad's toolbox like he's coming home to fix the sink." "Then we won't call it help," Vincent said. "We'll call it what it is: restitution. A correction on a balance sheet that was wrong from the start." She let out a broken half laugh, wiping her face with the heels of her hands. "You talk like this is just numbers." "It started as numbers," he admitted. "That's the problem. It won't end that way." He squeezed her shoulder, just once, then stepped back. "Go home, Sophie," he said. "Sleep. When you wake up, tell your mother I'd like to see her in my study tomorrow morning. We'll discuss her new contract. And for the record, you are never washing another dish in this house again." She looked up at him, as if checking one last time for the catch, the hidden clause, the trick in the fine print. Finding none, she nodded, slow and disbelieving. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She slid off the stool, untied the yellow apron, and left it folded neatly on the counter. Her backpack looked even smaller now as she slung it over one shoulder and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused and glanced back. "Mr. Harlow?" she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said, voice steady for the first time that night. "For seeing it." He didn't trust himself to answer, so he just inclined his head. She slipped out into the thinning dark. When the door closed, Vincent turned back to the sink full of dishes. For years, he'd thought his work was about buildings, steel, glass, profit margins measured in percentages and square footage. Now, surrounded by soap bubbles and cooling coffee, he understood. The real structures he'd helped build were invisible. Legal frameworks, power imbalances, systems that let a sick widow keep mopping floors while her daughter bled herself dry in the shadows. Tonight, he'd torn down one beam of that structure. Tomorrow, in his study with Eleanor Brennan sitting across from him, he would start ripping out the rest. By 9 the next morning, the mansion smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, making the house look gentler than it had in the dark. It was a lie. Vincent knew better now. He stood by the window in his study, jacket on, tie knotted, every inch the composed Billionaire the business channels liked to quote. The mask felt heavier than usual. On his desk lay 3 neat stacks of paper, a revised employment contract, an insurance package proposal, and a printed page with a hospital's letterhead and a large red past due stamped across it. A soft knock sounded on the doorframe. "Mr. Harlow," his assistant, Jana, said. "Mrs. Brennan is here." "Send her in," Vincent replied. Eleanor Brennan stepped over the threshold as if every inch of carpet might explode. She wore her usual uniform, crisp white blouse, navy skirt, sensible black shoes, but today the fabric hung looser on her frame. A patterned scarf was tied carefully over her hair, hiding the chemo's damage with the kind of dignity people reached for when everything else was out of their control. "Good morning, sir," she said, hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "You wanted to see me?" "Please," Vincent said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat." She hesitated for half a second before obeying. House staff didn't sit in this room. It was where executives and lawyers and politicians lowered themselves into those chairs, not women who scrubbed the floors outside. Is there a problem with my work?" she asked quietly. "If there is, sir, I'm sure we can fix it. I know I've had some off days lately, but I promise I can." "There is a problem," Vincent said, cutting in before she could twist herself into another apology. "But it's not your work." He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the desk. "Last night," he said, "I found Sophie in the main kitchen again. At 2:30 in the morning." Color drained from Eleanor's face. "Oh God," she whispered. I told her not to. Mr. Harlow, I am so sorry. She shouldn't have bothered you. I swear She didn't bother me," Vincent said. "She terrified me." Eleanor blinked, thrown off balance. He continued, voice even. "She has been working a grocery store shift until midnight, then coming here to finish her duties until 3 or 4, then going to school on 2 or 3 hours of sleep. She's been doing this for at least 6 weeks." Tears pooled instantly in Eleanor's eyes. She shook her head, once hard. "No," she said. "No, that can't be right. She told me she just picked up a few extra hours on weekends. She said she was studying at the library after." Her voice broke. "She promised me." "I spoke to her headmaster this morning," Vincent said. "Riverside has documented her absences, her failing grades, her falling asleep in class. The scholarship committee is ready to revoke her place." Eleanor pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. When she finally lowered it, something rough and broken had slipped past her composure. "I told her to be honest," she whispered. "I told her we would manage. I didn't know it had gotten that bad." Vincent slid the hospital letter across the desk. She stared at it without touching. "You didn't tell her about these," he said quietly. "Or about the eviction notice sitting in your kitchen drawer. Or about the credit cards you've maxed out to keep the lights on between chemo cycles." Her eyes flashed up to his, sharp through the tears. "How do you know about that?" "Because I should have known years ago," he said. "And I didn't. So I corrected that mistake." She swallowed, anger and humiliation warring in her gaze. "You had no right," she said hoarsely. "You're absolutely correct," he replied. And yet here we are. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the polished wood. Employer and employee, billionaire and widow, both suffocating under different versions of the same system. I want to be very clear about something, Mrs. Brennan, Vincent said at last. Sophie's situation is not a result of you being lazy or careless or bad at your job. It's the result of a cancer diagnosis that your salary could never realistically absorb, a landlord who raises rent every year because he can, and a legal settlement that paid your husband's death out in scraps. Eleanor's shoulders drew in, as if curling around an old wound. That settlement saved us, she said quietly. People from church kept saying, at least you got something. They called us lucky. Her mouth twisted. Lucky! It should have done more than save you for a year, Vincent said. It should have set you up so your daughter didn't have to trade sleep for medical bills. She looked at him blankly. The world doesn't work like that, sir. It can't, Vincent said. When the people holding the levers decide it should. He tapped the middle stack of papers. I've restructured your position, he said. Effective immediately. You are no longer just a housekeeper. Your new title is Estate Family Services Coordinator. You'll still oversee housekeeping schedules for the mansion, but a significant part of your time will be spent managing staff welfare, liaising with HR, and connecting employees with external resources when they're facing a crisis. Eleanor blinked. I don't understand. It means, Vincent said, that your job is no longer simply to keep the marble shiny. It's to make sure no one else under this roof ends up where you are right now. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. You'll receive a modest bump in salary, he continued, but more importantly, comprehensive health insurance for you and your daughter. Chemo, tests, follow UPS, therapy, paid medical leave. If you need to miss work for treatment, you won't be punished for trying to stay alive. Eleanor shook her head again, more violently this time. No, she said. Mr. Harlow, I can't accept that. This isn't a handout, he said, anticipating the argument. It's a correction. It's charity, she snapped, surprising both of them with the force behind the word. You're offering to rescue us because you feel guilty, and then what? I sit here and watch you pay for things I should be able to handle myself? What kind of example does that set for Sophie? That when life hits you, you wait around until a rich man feels bad enough to fix it. Her eyes were blazing now, cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and fury. I have worked my whole life, she said. I cleaned offices pregnant. I went back to work 2 weeks after my husband's funeral. I have never taken a handout, not from the government, not from the church, not from anyone. I will not start now. For the first time since she walked in, Vincent saw the full magnitude of her pride, not the brittle kind that refused to admit weakness, but the fierce kind that had kept her moving when any rational person would have collapsed. Mrs. Brennan, he said carefully, what kind of example does it set for Sophie if the lesson she learns is that she must destroy herself rather than accept help that is owed to her? Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it again. The muscles in her jaw worked. You don't owe us anything, she finally whispered. Vincent reached into the bottom of the folder and pulled out a photocopied page. He turned it around and slid it toward her. Do you recognize that signature? He asked. Her gaze dropped. On the page, her own name stared back at her. Eleanor M. Brennan, scrawled beneath a dense block of legal text in ink that had bled slightly into cheap paper. That's from the day you settled your husband's case, Vincent said. The firm on the other side was Harlow and Associates. My firm. The attorneys who buried you in motions were people I hired and trained. The strategies they used were ones I designed. I may not have been in the room, but my fingerprints are all over the tools that were used on you. Eleanor's grip on the paper tightened until it shook. So yes, Vincent said quietly, I do owe you something. Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. They just sat there, bright and furious. It wasn't you, she said, each word dragged out. You had already sold the firm. I remember. The lawyer they gave me said we were lucky you weren't personally involved, or they would have crushed us even worse. She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Imagine that. This is the better version. That doesn't absolve me, Vincent said. I built a culture where winning mattered more than the people on the other side of the table. I walked away with a fortune and left families like yours holding the bill. I told myself that was just the cost of doing business. He met her gaze head on. I was wrong. Silence settled again, heavier but less hostile. Eleanor stared down at her signature, fingers loosening and tightening in a small, unconscious rhythm. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked at last, voice low. Vincent nudged the revised contract toward her. "You remain employed here," he said. "Your title and duties change. Your health care is upgraded. An addendum states that any outstanding medical debt related to your cancer treatment will be covered by the Harlow Family Trust. In return, you work with me to identify any other staff members in crisis and help design a benefit system that doesn't require 15-year-olds to mop up the blood." Her lips twitched at the imagery, but she didn't look up. "You said you don't take charity," he continued. "Fina, don't. Take a promotion. Take a set of tools and authority you should have had from the start. Let your daughter see that accepting structural change is not weakness. It's survival." The fight drained from her posture by degrees. It didn't disappear. Eleanor Brennan didn't seem like someone who would ever stop fighting, but it shifted direction. "Why would you trust me with something like that?" she murmured. "Because you've navigated this nightmare without collapsing," he said simply. "You know where the system fails. And because Sophie trusts you enough to lie to your face if she thinks the truth will break you. That kind of loyalty isn't bought. It's earned." At the mention of her daughter, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "She looks so tired," she whispered. "I kept telling her to stay home from the store to sleep in, but she just smiled at me like I was the child. She said she could handle it, that she was strong. I thought." Her voice trailed off, then came back rough. "I thought I was protecting her." "You were doing what you could with the information and resources you had," Vincent said. "The blame for what she's been forced to carry doesn't sit with you. It sits with people like me who had resources and chose not to look." She let out a shaky breath. "And Sophie?" she asked. "What happens to her in this new arrangement?" "She goes back to being a student," Vincent said. "The grocery store loses an underpaid employee. My kitchen loses an illegal night shift. Riverside keeps a brilliant girl instead of tossing her aside for being poor and exhausted." Eleanor choked out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't broken halfway through. "She's going to hate it," she said. "She's going to say we're taking advantage, that we're letting you feel better about yourself at her expense. Then she and I will argue about it," Vincent said. "But she won't be arguing it from behind a sink." Eleanor stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached for the pen on his desk. Her hand hovered above the signature line. "This still feels like charity," she whispered. "Then don't sign it for yourself," he replied. "Sign it for the girl who has been waking up in the dark to hold your world together with dish soap and minimum wage." Her hand steadied. She signed. When she pushed the papers back, something in her posture had changed. She was still small in the vast leather chair, still wrapped in the scarf that marked her as a cancer patient, still shaking faintly from the emotional whiplash of the last half hour. But there was a new angle to her chin, a glint in her eye that looked dangerously like hope. "Thank you," she said. The words scraped on the way out and used to this direction. "I don't know how to explain this to Sophie." "You don't have to," Vincent said. "I will." She stood up, smoothing her skirt with automatic precision. "For what it's worth," she said at the door, pausing without turning back, "I don't forgive you for what happened in that courtroom." "Neither do I," Vincent answered. "But," she added, "I am willing to see what you do with the guilt." When she was gone, the study felt different. The same books on the shelves, the same art on the walls. But the contract on his desk had shifted the room's gravity. He picked up the phone once more, dialing an internal extension. "HR." A voice answered. "This is Harlow," he said. "Clear your afternoon. We're rewriting the rules." As he spoke, he pictured Sophie waking up that morning expecting another 14-hour gauntlet, school, work, dishes, fear, and had to resist the urge to drive down to their apartment himself, stand in the doorway, and physically block her path to the sink. Soon, he promised himself. Soon, the only thing she'd be carrying to his house after dark would be a backpack full of textbooks, and even that by choice. For now, there was still a system to dismantle. 6 weeks after Vincent rewrote Eleanor's contract, the mansion felt like a different house, even if most of the changes were invisible to anyone who only looked at the marble. The first difference was the clock. At 2:30 a.m., the corridors were finally silent again. No soft clink of plates. No secret footsteps to the kitchen. The cameras logged nothing more dramatic than the night guard making his rounds. Sophie was asleep, not collapsed in her clothes on a couch with the TV flickering, not passed out over a textbook at the kitchen table, actually in bed, under a real blanket, with an alarm set for a reasonable hour. It had taken days before her body believed that was allowed. The first week, she jerked awake every night around 2, convinced she'd missed her shift, heart pounding, hands reaching automatically for the yellow apron that now hung on a hook behind Eleanor's bedroom door, like a retired uniform. By week 3, the nightmares came less often. By week 6, they were the exception instead of the rule. Sleep changed her face. The bruised shadows under her eyes lightened. Her hands stopped cracking open from hot water and cheap soap. She started walking like a girl again instead of a soldier halfway through a tour. The second difference was on Riverside Prep's attendance spreadsheet. Sophie hadn't missed a single day since the night in the kitchen. Her teachers noticed before she did. Mr. Chun, her math teacher, had been braced for the quiet, hollow-eyed girl who dozed off in the back row and flinched whenever he handed back tests. Instead, he found Sophie in her usual seat, notebook open, pen ready, staring at the board with the wary intensity of someone waiting for the punchline to a joke only she could hear. The first quiz she took after the change was a disaster. Halfway through, her breathing sped up, the numbers on the page blurred. Every wrong answer felt like another brick on her chest, another step back toward the scholarship committee's chopping block. She pressed the heel of her hand into her sternum, as if she could physically hold herself together. "Miss Brennan," Mr. Chun said gently from the front, "you're going to tear the paper." She looked down. Her fingers had shredded the corner of the test. "I'm fine," she muttered, but her voice shook. She wasn't fine. She left 3 questions blank and scored lower than she had before things started to improve. When Mr. Chun handed the quiz back, her hands trembled. "I can't lose it again," she whispered, more to herself than to him, staring at the red marks like they were a judge's verdict. "Again," he repeated, eyebrows knitting. She blinked, realizing she'd spoken aloud, and snapped her mouth shut. That afternoon, Riverside's counselor sent an email to the emergency contact listed on Sophie's file. It no longer went to an overworked legal aid office or a disconnected number scribbled on an old form. It went to Vincent Harlow. He arrived at the school the next day, trading his usual entourage and town car for a low-key sedan and a plain navy suit. Riverside's front office went into a minor panic, trying to decide whether to offer him coffee or call the local paper. Vincent signed the visitor's log with brisk efficiency and asked to see Mr. Chun and the school counselor privately. The meeting took place in a small conference room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and institutional carpet cleaner. Sophie didn't know it was happening. She was in the library, chin propped on her hand, staring at a calculus problem set like it might personally attack her. "She's doing the work," Mr. Chun said, spreading a series of graded assignments on the table. "You can see the improvement. But every time she takes a quiz, she treats it like a final verdict on her family survival. The anxiety shuts her brain down. She associates failure with catastrophe," the counselor added. "If a grade drops, she assumes something terrible will happen. She'll be expelled, you'll fire her mother, they'll lose their apartment, the chemo will stop. It's classic trauma response." Vincent listened, jaw tight. "How do we fix it?" he asked. "Therapy," the counselor said without hesitation. "Real, consistent trauma counseling. She's been living in fight or flight for years. Her nervous system doesn't know what safe feels like." "Set it up," Vincent said. "The best specialist you can find. I'll cover the cost anonymously." They both looked at him, expressions a mix of surprise and something softer. "Mr. Harlow," the counselor said, "you've already done a lot. You don't have to. She is in this position because a system I helped build crushed her family and then walked away," he interrupted. "I'm not interested in the bare minimum." The next week, Sophie sat in a small office with a woman named Dr. Alvarez and tried not to bolt when asked how she'd been sleeping. The word therapy made her itch, but Dr. Alvarez didn't ask her to lie on a couch or dig through her darkest memories in the first 5 minutes. She asked about math and grocery store shifts and what 2:30 a.m. smelled like. "It smells like lemon soap and fear," Sophie said before she could swallow the answer. "Good," Dr. Alvarez said calmly. "That's where we'll start." While Sophie learned how to breathe through panic instead of drowning in it, Eleanor grew into her new role at the estate like a plant finally given enough light. At first, she insisted on still scrubbing the guest wing floors herself, arguing that coordinator sounded like sitting behind a desk, and she didn't know how to sit while other people worked. Vincent let her keep one wing. The rest of her time, he pointed firmly at a different kind of mess. She started with a stack of employee files and a highlighter. Within 2 weeks, she flagged 3 cases that made her stomach twist with bitter recognition. A groundskeeper splitting insulin doses to make them last longer. A line cook skipping follow-up appointments for a nagging cough because the copay was more than his weekly grocery budget. A young maid wiring half her paycheck to a disabled sister in another state and quietly defaulting on her own rent. Why did no one see this? Vincent asked, staring at the summaries Eleanor laid on his desk. "Because they did what I did," she replied. They smiled. They said they were fine, and the people in charge believed them because it was easier. They fixed it case by case. New health coverage, emergency family fund, quiet, targeted salary adjustments. Vincent authorized the numbers, but it was Eleanor who sat at kitchen tables and staff lockers, translating policy into food on plates and medicine in cabinets. Word spread faster than any memo. By the end of the month, employees at the Harlow estate knew that if life fell apart, there was a door they could knock on where the answer wasn't a pink slip. Vincent watched it happen with a complicated mix of satisfaction and unease. Every life they stabilized was proof of concept and a reminder of how many houses like his still ran on silent sacrifices no one was paid to notice. In the middle of all this structural work, something smaller and stranger began to take shape. A routine between him and Sophie. It started with a missed ride. One Thursday, her bus broke down on the edge of town. She called Eleanor, who panicked, and called Vincent, who was already on his way back from a site visit. He swung his car around, found Sophie sitting on a cracked plastic bench with her backpack at her feet, and waved her into the passenger seat before she could protest. The 10-minute drive stretched into half an hour of unexpected conversation. She stared at the dashboard, throat tight, and then, maybe because she was too tired to keep holding everything in, she started talking. About math. About how weird it felt to sleep more than 4 hours. About the way people at school treated her differently now that she wasn't the perfect scholarship robot. They watched her, waiting for the next collapse. "Do you know what they said when I first came here?" she asked, staring out the window. "They called me the Brennan Miracle. Poor kid from nowhere, genius with numbers, the one everyone bets on. It was like being a mascot. Now, they just look disappointed. People prefer clean narratives," Vincent said. "Up or down, success or failure. They don't handle detours well." "Yeah, well," she muttered, "I'm a walking detour." He thought of his own public narrative. The ruthless prodigy, the golden boy who'd turn a law firm into an empire, the stoic billionaire whose only weakness was insomnia. None of those stories had room for a dying sister or a widow cleaning his floors. "Maybe we should stop letting other people write the story," he said. After that, Thursday drives became a pattern. Some weeks, it was a ride from school to the estate when she stayed late for tutoring. Other times, it was a lift home after she helped Eleanor with paperwork in a new family services office. They talked about everything but the court case that tied them together. Sophie's fascination with statistics, Vincent's inability to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs, the absurdity of rich people paying 6 figures for apartments smaller than her living room. He recommended books. She tore through them and threw them back with critiques sharper than most of his board's feedback. One evening, sitting at the long dining table after a particularly brutal calculus session, she pushed her notebook away with a groan. "You know what's funny?" she said. "Before Dad died, I wanted to be an engineer. Build things. Bridges, maybe. Stuff that lasted. Now I can't stop thinking about lawyers. Occupational hazard of having your life wrecked in a courtroom, Vincent said dryly. I don't mean it like that, she said. I mean, what if I could be the kind of lawyer who doesn't let what happened to Mom happen to other people? Someone on our side for once. He studied her face, the spark in her eyes when she talked about loopholes and leverage, the way her anger sharpened into clarity instead of chaos when she focused it on systems instead of individuals. You would be terrifying in a deposition, he said. That's a compliment. Do you think I could actually do it? She asked, voice small under the bravado. Law school, I mean. That's big. You're already doing something bigger, he said. You survived a war zone nobody else saw. Law school is just paperwork and endurance. You have both. She looked at him like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. You're biased, she said. Deeply, he agreed. At the hospital, Eleanor's doctors started using words like responsive and promising. Regular treatment, paid on time, turned possibilities into probabilities. Her color improved. The scarf stayed, but the gray fatigue under her skin eased. She began cracking jokes again in the staff break room, sharp little darts that made even the stoic security guards snort into their coffee. On the surface, not much had changed. The same cars pulled up to the front gate. The same glittering parties spilled laughter onto the lawn. The same magazine profiles called Vincent ruthless and visionary in equal measure. But underneath, a quiet revolution had begun. Sometimes, late at night, Vincent would stand in the doorway of the empty kitchen and look at the hook where Sophie's yellow apron hung. He left it there on purpose, a reminder of the before. One evening, Eleanor found him there. You're going to wear out that hook, staring at it so much, she said, coming in with a stack of forms under her arm. I could take it down, he said. Donate it to a museum of terrible management. Leave it, she replied. It keeps us honest. She set the paperwork on the counter. What's this? He asked. Preliminary reports, she said, on the family fund. Cases we've helped. People who didn't know how close they were to their own 2:30 a.m. sink. He glanced at the names. None of them were Brennan's. That, more than anything, drove the point home. This is just the start, Eleanor said. There are more out there. In other houses, other companies, other courts. I know, Vincent said quietly. He thought of the network of firms that had admired Harlow and Associates, copied its tactics, mimicked its ruthlessness. He thought of the skyscrapers downtown, each one a monument to someone else's version of standard practice. We can't fix all of it, Eleanor said, but we can fix this corner. He nodded. This corner, he echoed. Upstairs, the light under Sophie's door went out at a reasonable hour. In the months to come, she would fight through panic attacks, catch up on missed coursework with a ferocity that scared even her tutors, and start circling college brochures like they were maps to a place she'd once believed she wasn't allowed to go. For now, though, she slept. And for the first time in a long time, as Vincent turned off the kitchen light and walked back through his silent house, he felt like the quiet wasn't accusing him. It was giving him room to decide what to build next. By the time autumn settled properly over Ashford Hill, the leaves along the driveway had turned the color of old copper, and college brochures had colonized every flat surface in the Brennan's apartment. They came in glossy waves: Yale, Columbia, Stanford, a dozen others Sophie had once sworn she'd never waste the postage dreaming about. Now they spread across the coffee table like a dare. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a half-eaten bowl of cereal going soggy beside her, flipping a Yale pamphlet back and forth. The smiling students on the cover looked like they'd stepped out of another universe. Well-rested, carefree, convinced the future would politely arrange itself around their ambitions. Mom, she called, if I went to Connecticut, would you survive without my extraordinary microwave skills? From the kitchen, Eleanor snorted. I survived 30 years before you learned how not to burn instant noodles. I think I'll manage. Sophie smiled, then sobered as she looked down at the application checklist. Essays, recommendations, transcripts that showed a jagged dip right around the time her life turned into a graveyard shift. Her fingers hovered over the line that said personal statement. Tell us about a challenge you have faced and how it shaped who you are. She could write about the night in the kitchen, the grocery store, the smell of chemo on Eleanor's clothes, Vincent's face when he told her the truth about Harlow and Associates. The problem wasn't content, it was containment. Every time she tried to put it into words, something in her chest clenched, warning her that opening that door all the way might never let it close again. A gentle knock sounded on the open apartment door. "Permission to enter the war room?" Vincent asked. He held a plain folder in one hand, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a billionaire and more like someone's overworked uncle who'd taken a wrong turn into the wrong tax bracket. "You brought more," Sophie groaned, gesturing to the pile. "If another IV sends a brochure with suspiciously diverse friend groups laughing under a tree, I'm suing for emotional manipulation." "Relax," he said. "No more brochures. I come bearing something more dangerous." He lifted the folder. "Feedback." Sophie's stomach dipped. "Did Dr. Wells tell you I failed something again? Because that chemistry test was rigged. Nobody needs to know that much about amino acids." "Not school feedback," Vincent said. "Your essay draft." Her eyes widened. "You read it." "You asked me to," he reminded her. She had. Late one night, after tutoring, when the stack of how to write a winning personal statement guides started to blur together into one smug voice. She'd shoved the printed pages at him and muttered, "You were a scholarship kid once, right? Or did the money fairy just deliver a trust fund to your crib?" He'd taken the pages, promised to read them, and hadn't mentioned them again until now. "Well?" she asked, folding her arms with forced nonchalance. "On a scale of 1 to burn it and pretend we never speak of this again, how bad is it?" He sat on the edge of the armchair opposite her. "Technically," he said, "it's perfect. Structured. Clear. You hit all the expected beats. Overcoming adversity, lessons learned, gratitude for opportunity. Any admissions committee would nod politely." "Technically," she repeated, wary. "There's a but coming. I can hear it cracking its knuckles." He opened the folder and tapped the first page. "This," he said, "is a police report." She blinked. "Excuse me." "It lists events," he continued. "Dates. Facts. Your father's accident. Your mother's diagnosis. The jobs. The night in the kitchen. You recount them like you're testifying in court, terrified that if you let your voice shake, the judge will throw the case out." He crept up Sophie's neck. "I thought that's what they wanted," she muttered. "Evidence. Proof I'm not just some charity case who got lucky because a rich guy felt bad." "You are not a charity case," Vincent said sharply. "And what they want is to know who you are, not just what happened to you." He hesitated, then softened his tone. "Right now, the essay sounds like you're trying to convince someone you didn't deserve what happened. You do not have to stand in front of strangers and prove you are worthy of being treated like a human being." Her throat tightened. "If I write what it really felt like," she said, voice low, "I'm going to fall apart." "Then fall apart," he said quietly. "On the page. That's where it's safest. That's where you get to decide how the pieces go back together." She looked away, blinking hard. "You say that like it's easy," she muttered. "It isn't," he said. "Ask my therapist." She snapped her head back to him. "You go to therapy?" "Shocking, I know," he said dryly. "Turns out accumulating billions and a lifetime of unresolved grief is not a recipe for emotional stability." Her lips twitched despite herself. "What for?" she asked. "The insomnia?" "That," he said, "and some other things I've been avoiding looking at directly for about 30 years. He placed her essay back in the folder and set on the table. "Look," he said, "you don't owe Yale or anyone else you're paying in graphic detail. But if you choose to write about what happened, don't lie by omission. Don't sand down the edges so much that it becomes a story about a hard-working girl and a benevolent billionaire. That's not what this was." She exhaled slowly, the words pinning her somewhere between exposed and seen. "I'll think about it," she said. "Good," he replied. He stood, but instead of leaving, he lingered by the door. "By the way, your mother invited me for dinner tomorrow. She says she's going to cook something that isn't microwaved." "She's feeling show-offy," Sophie said. Her blood work came back good. "I know," Vincent said softly. "She sent me a picture of the lab results like a teenager with a new car." Pride warmed Sophie's chest, mingled with the ever-present thread of fear. Good news in their family always felt like tempting fate. "Go write something messy," he added, nodding toward her laptop. "I'll expect tears on the page." "You're very demanding for someone who can't use a washing machine properly," she called after him. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone with the brochure mountain and the blinking cursor. She opened a new document. The first sentence came out before she could second-guess it. "The night I learned that a man I had never met had helped steal my future was the same night he started giving it back." She stared at it, heartbeat loud in her ears. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Let's fall apart." 3 weeks later, rain hammered against Vincent's study windows while he read the final version. The essay was nothing like the tidy draft she'd first handed him. This one bled. She wrote about 2:30 a.m. in sensory detail, the sting of hot water on cracked skin, the weight of dishes that felt heavier with every hour, the thick, sour smell of fear in the back of her throat. She described the grocery store manager who looked the other way at her exact age, because desperation was cheap labor, and the security cameras she pretended couldn't see her when she nodded off in the break room. She wrote about watching Eleanor count pill bottles against paychecks, trying to decide whether missing a dose or a bill would kill them faster. About the way letters from the hospital piled up like threats. She didn't use Vincent's name. She called him the man whose signature sat on the paperwork that turned my father's life into $90,000 and a footnote. She wrote about the moment he told her the truth, the way the words, "that's on me," rewired something fundamental in her understanding of power and responsibility. Then she wrote about choice, about how he could have left it there, guilty, apologetic, unchanged, and how instead he made himself the first person to stand between her and the system instead of on top of it. She didn't saint him. She listed the ways he'd failed, the years he'd benefited from not asking questions. But she also wrote, with startling clarity, about the day she realized change didn't have to come from saints. It could come from people who were finally brave enough to look at what they'd broken. The last paragraph made his throat close. "I used to think sacrifice meant giving up everything quietly and hoping someone noticed. Now, I know real sacrifice is when the people who built the fire stop asking me to walk through it alone and start carrying water with me." When he finished, Vincent set the pages down carefully, as if they might shatter. He felt wrung out, exposed, weirdly lighter. There was a knock at his door. "Come in," he said, voice rougher than he liked. Eleanor slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her. She wore no scarf today. Soft, stubborn stubble had begun to grow where chemo once left bare skin. The sight made something like joy twist in his chest. "I was going to bring you the updated numbers on the family fund," she said, holding up a folder. "But you look like someone just told you your stock portfolio ran away with the gardener." "Worse," he said, "your daughter showed me my soul and then graded it." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with wary amusement. "She finished the essay?" He handed it over. "See for yourself." She sat, smoothing the pages, and began to read. For a while, the only sound in the room was the rain and the soft rustle of paper. Vincent watched her face carefully, the way her mouth compressed at certain lines, the slight tremor in her hands when Sophie described choosing between sleep and survival, the pride that broke through when the essay shifted from victimhood to fierce resolve. When she reached the end, she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "She wrote this?" she whispered. "My Sophie." "Yes," Vincent said. "Your Sophie. She's so angry," Eleanor said, voice shaking. "And so kind. At the same time. Wonder where she gets that from," he murmured. Eleanor shot him a look that was half glare, half gratitude. "Why did you really help us?" "Vincent," she asked suddenly. "I mean past the guilt, past the firm. You'd already done more than anyone had a right to expect before you started rewriting policies and building funds." He opened his mouth to give the easy answer, because it was right, because he could, because wealth without responsibility was just theft with better PR. But the words stuck. The truth was Messier. He stood and crossed to the window, watching rain streak down the glass in crooked lines. "When I was 22, he said, my sister Julia was 16. Leukemia. Aggressive. There was an experimental trial, a treatment that might have bought her more time, maybe even saved her. It was expensive, risky, not covered by insurance." Eleanor stayed silent, listening. My father looked at the numbers. Vincent continued. He weighed the odds, the cost, the inconvenience. He decided it wasn't worth it. Bitterness edged his voice. He called it throwing good money after bad. Eleanor made a small, horrified sound. I argued, Vincent said. As much as a kid who'd spent his life taught that challenging his father was a punishable offense could argue. But in the end, he signed the papers. Chose the cheap, standard route. Julia died 4 months later. He exhaled slowly. I inherited everything 10 years after that, he said. By then, my father was dead, the firm was thriving, and the girl we'd saved all that money for was buried in a cemetery outside the city. I've spent 3 decades pretending I could balance that equation with buildings and charities and big checks at Gallus. He turned back to her. When I saw Sophie at that sink, he said softly, I saw myself. Not her. I was never that brave, but the version of me that should have existed. The one who would have done anything, sacrificed anything, to keep Julia alive. Only Sophie was actually doing it. She was paying a price my father refused to pay for his own child, and the world was just letting her. Eleanor's eyes shone. You didn't fail your sister, she said. You were a boy in a house where your voice never counted. I watched, he said. That was enough. He sat again, feeling older and strangely lighter. Helping you wasn't about being noble, he said. It was about finally doing what I should have done then. Choosing the person over the ledger. Refusing to let someone like my father make the final call. Eleanor reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The gesture was simple, almost maternal. You did choose, she said. You chose now. And my daughter will walk into whichever college she picks carrying that choice with her. They sat in silence for a moment, 3 ghosts sharing the room. Julia, Daniel, the version of Sophie who might have broken under the weight instead of bending. A soft knock interrupted them. Sophie poked her head in, cheeks pink for the chill outside. Am I interrupting a billionaire feelings summit? She asked. Always, Vincent said. Commune. She stepped inside, seeing the essay in Eleanor's hands, the dampness around her mother's eyes, the expression on Vincent's face. Something in her gaze sharpened. You read it? She asked Eleanor. Yes, her mother said. It's a lot. Too much. Sophie asked quickly. I can tone it down. Make it more inspirational underdog and less systemic indictment. Don't you dare, Eleanor said fiercely. If they don't want the truth, they don't deserve you. Sophie blinked, then smiled, a real one, crooked and bright. Okay then, she said. No toning down. She looked at Vincent. Thank you, she said, for the notes. And for all of it. He felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. Just don't become a corporate defense lawyer, he said gruffly. I don't think my heart could take it. She grinned. Please, I'm going to spend my career making men like you very uncomfortable in courtrooms. Good, he said. Someone should. Outside, the rain finally began to ease, thin streams of sunlight pushing through the clouds. On the desk, Sophie's essay lay between them, a bridge made of ink and confession. For the first time since Julia's death, Vincent allowed himself to believe that some wounds didn't just scar over. They could be rerouted, reshaped into something that pointed forward instead of back. Not erased, never erased, but carried differently. In the months to come, acceptance letters would arrive in thick envelopes, and Sophie would stand on a stage in a cap and gown, looking out at a crowd where a billionaire and a recovering cancer patient would sit shoulder to shoulder, both crying in very undignified ways. For now, in the quiet of the study, 3 people sat with an essay and the ghosts it named, and let the truth do what it was supposed to do. Hurt, heal, change the story. Spring arrived like a hell breath finally released. On the morning the first college decision came in, Sophie pretended not to care. She ate toast over the sink, checked the weather, reread an old text from Dr. Alvarez about grounding techniques. Anything but open the email glaring at her from her phone screen. Eleanor watched her for a full minute before losing patience. You're going to burn a hole in that notification, she said. Just open it. What if it's a no? Sophie asked, staring at the subject line from Yale. What if I put all that trauma on paper for nothing and they send back thanks, but no thanks, please enjoy our rejection as character development? Then we cry. Eleanor said simply. And we open the next one. Sophie exhaled, thumb hovering. Okay, she muttered. Okay. She tapped. The email loaded in a stuttering blur, the apartment's aging Wi-Fi milking the suspense for all it was worth. For a heartbeat, all she could see was a block of text. Then a single word surfaced like a life raft. Congratulations. Her knees nearly gave out. Mom, she gasped, fingers flying. Mom, may I? Eleanor was already moving, grabbing the phone with careful, trembling hands, reading the first lines aloud through tears. We are pleased to offer you admission, she choked. Sophie, you did it. They both laughed and cried at the same time, clinging to each other in the tiny kitchen as if the email might physically blow away if they didn't hold on tight enough. By the end of the week, the stack of congratulations had grown. Georgetown, Columbia, Stanford, full rides, merit awards, programs that used words like prestigious and competitive in a way that finally felt like a description instead of a threat. Sophie sat on the couch one night, surrounded by acceptance packets, feeling oddly shell-shocked. I don't know how to choose, she told Vincent when he came by with takeout and a thick folder of purely informational printouts about financial aid structures he'd already quietly circumvented. Try this, he said. Close your eyes. Imagine it's move-in day. Which campus makes your stomach flip in a good way instead of a bad one? She closed her eyes, inhaled, exhaled. Blue stone buildings, old libraries, a legal clinic flyer she'd seen online with civil rights and impact litigation in bold letters. Yale, she said. Then that's the one, he replied, like it was that simple. It wasn't that simple, of course. There were still forms to sign, housing to arrange, logistics to wrangle. But a decision, once made, had its own gravity. By the time graduation season rolled around, Sophie owned a Yale hoodie that she pretended not to wear every day and a calendar marked with a move-in date that felt both impossibly distant and terrifyingly close. First, there was the matter of finishing high school. Riverside's auditorium smelled like old wood and fresh lilies on graduation night. Rows of students in navy robes shifted nervously in their seats, tassels swinging as parents and grandparents and siblings crammed the folding chairs below, cameras poised. Backstage, Sophie adjusted her cap for the 20th time, hands clammy. You're going to crease it into another dimension, her friend Lila said, swatting her fingers away. I'm just making sure it doesn't fall off while I'm emotionally imploding in front of the entire senior class, Sophie muttered. You'll be fine, Lila said. Honestly, after what you've been through, this is like ordering at a drive-thru. Easy for someone without a valedictorian speech in their pocket to say. When Sophie's name had climbed back to the top of the rankings the previous semester, Dr. Wells had called her into the office with a smile that looked suspiciously like pride and asked if she'd be willing to deliver the address. Sophie had said yes before she could talk herself out of it. Now, as she peeked through the curtain, the weight of that yes pressed on her shoulders. In the front row, she spotted Eleanor. Her mother's scarf was gone, replaced by soft curls just starting to reclaim her scalp. She wore a simple blue dress and sat bolt upright, hands clasped around the program as if bracing for a sudden storm. Next to her, in a suit sharper than the ones he wore to board meetings, sat Vincent. He looked oddly uncomfortable in the folding chair, a man used to plush leather forced to balance on thin metal. But his eyes, usually cool in public, were bright and restless, tracking every movement on stage as if scanning for threats. Class of 20, please take your seats, someone announced. The ceremony began. Names were called. Diplomas were exchanged for handshakes and damp-palmed pride. Speeches were given by school board members who spoke earnestly about the leaders of tomorrow without knowing half the things some of those leaders had survived just to sit in those rows. Then Dr. Wells stepped up to the podium. It is my great honor, she said, to introduce this year's valedictorian, a young woman whose journey through Riverside has reminded us all of the difference one determined student can make, not just in her own life, but in the life of this community. Please welcome Sophie Brennan. Applause swelled. Sophie's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. As she walked onto the stage, the lights were a wall of white. She blinked, momentarily stunned, then found the small red of the camera recording the ceremony, and, just below it, her mother's face. Eleanor's eyes were already wet. Next to her, Vincent sat very still, jaw clenched, hands folded, as if holding himself together with invisible wires. Sophie reached the podium and unfolded the paper in her hand. She'd written a speech. She'd even practiced it. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, classmates who'd whispered about her sudden absences, teachers who'd pretended not to notice when she nodded off, staff who'd watched Vincent's car pull up for Thursday drives, something shifted. The rehearsed words suddenly felt as thin as tissue. She took a breath. Then, very carefully, she folded the paper back up and slid it into the pocket of her gown. A murmur went through the staff row. Dr. Wells' eyebrows shot up. In the audience, Vincent straightened, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. Sophie leaned toward the microphone. "A year ago," she said, voice echoing in the hushed auditorium, "I was washing dishes at 2:30 in the morning in a kitchen that didn't belong to me." A ripple moved through the crowd. Surprise, confusion. "I was supposed to be sleeping," she continued. "I was supposed to be rested for school, for exams, for the future everyone kept telling me I had. Instead, I was standing in front of a sink with my hands in water, so hot my skin cracked, trying to convince myself that if I just scrub hard enough, I could stop my life from falling apart." She paused, letting the silence hold the image. "I wasn't there because I liked doing dishes," she said wryly. A few students laughed nervously. "I was there because my mother was sick, because the chemo that was supposed to help her live was expensive and our rent didn't care if she could stand up long enough to earn it. Because a lawsuit that should have protected our family paid out enough for a funeral but not enough for a future." She didn't look at Vincent, but she felt his gaze like a steady presence. "I thought the only way to keep us afloat was to trade my sleep, my grades, my health, my future for hours on a pay stub and a clean kitchen," she said. "I thought that was what love looked like." She swallowed, throat tight. "I was wrong," she said. "Love isn't a child quietly drowning so the adults around her can keep breathing. Real love doesn't ask 15-year-olds to be human shields against a system that was never built for them in the first place." In the front row, Eleanor's shoulders shook. Vincent's hand found hers and squeezed. "I stand here today as your valedictorian, not because I work harder than anyone else," Sophie said. "Plenty of you worked just as hard, in ways I may never know about. I stand here because for the first time in a long time, someone with power noticed a broken pattern and chose to fix it instead of stepping over it." She let the words land. "There is a man in this room," she went on, "who spent years benefiting from the very system that hurt my family. He could have kept ignoring it. He had every legal right to do so. Instead, he looked at the damage and said, 'That's on me.' And then, this is the important part, he did something about it." A murmur rippled again. Cameras shifted toward the front row. "I'm not telling you this to make him a hero," Sophie said quickly. "He's not perfect. None of us are. I'm telling you this because it changed the way I understand privilege, responsibility, and what it means to make it." She braced her hands on the sides of the podium. "We've all been told, over and over, that success is individual," she said. "That if we study hard and play by the rules, we can climb any ladder. What they don't tell you is that some of those ladders are missing rungs. Some are coated in oil. Some are built on top of people who were never invited to climb at all." She scanned the crowd, catching the eye of a janitor leaning against the back wall, of a girl in the third row whose uniform was always a half size too big because it was meant to last 2 years instead of 1. "Tonight, we are being celebrated for our potential," she said. "Our test scores, our extracurriculars, the college logos on the envelopes we opened. That's all fine. But if we walk out of here and use our potential only to build higher walls around our own success, then everything I went through, everything some of you have gone through, becomes just another inspirational anecdote for people who will never stand where we stood." She took a breath, steadying. "I'm going to law school," she said. "Not because I think another degree will magically fix the world, but because I've seen what happens in courtrooms when only one side can afford to be heard. I want to stand in those rooms and make sure the next Eleanor Brennan, the next Daniel Brennan, the next kid washing dishes at 2:30 in the morning has someone tearing holes in the paperwork on their behalf. A hush settled, deep and intent. But you don't need a law degree to do what I'm asking, she said. Whatever field you're going into, business, medicine, teaching, art, look for the broken patterns. Look for the kid who's too tired to keep their eyes open. The coworker who's always taking one more shift. The family that keeps showing up at the ER instead of a primary care office. Ask why. Then use whatever power you have, your vote, your voice, your budget, your job title, to make it less likely that survival depends on a miracle or a billionaire's guilty conscience. She smiled then, small but fierce. We graduated, she said. That's an achievement, but it's also a responsibility. We have seen too much to pretend we don't know how the story goes when no one intervenes. Her gaze found her mother again. For the longest time, I thought my future had been stolen, she said softly. Tonight, looking out at all of you, at my mom, at the man who decided to stop standing on my neck and start standing beside me, I know the truth. She straightened. My future was delayed, she said, not destroyed, and I intend to use every day I've been given to make sure no other child has to bargain theirs away in a kitchen sink. She stepped back from the microphone. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the auditorium exploded. Students rose, clapping, shouting. Teachers wiped their eyes. Somewhere in the back, someone whistled. The sound rolled over her in a wave. In the front row, Eleanor wept openly, no longer bothering to hide it. Vincent, who had faced hostile boards and furious investors without blinking, felt tears spill over before he could stop them. Eleanor squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. He squeezed back. That was your doing, she shouted over the noise. No, he said, voice raw. That was hers. I just stopped getting in the way. Later, when diplomas were handed out and caps were thrown and the parking lot turned into a chaotic reunion of hugs and photos, Sophie found them by the edge of the lawn. Eleanor pulled her into a crushing embrace, murmuring a tangle of "I'm proud of you," and "I'm sorry," and "I love you" into her hair. When she finally let go, Vincent stepped forward, suddenly awkward, as if unsure what role he was allowed to play. She made the decision for him, wrapping her arms around his middle in a quick, fierce hug. "Don't get used to public displays of affection," she said into his suit jacket. "I have a reputation to maintain." "I'll try to recover," he replied, throat tight. They stood there, three people who had once occupied entirely separate worlds, now bound together by something that felt suspiciously like family. Weeks later, on a bright August morning, Vincent and Eleanor watched Sophie walk through the gates of her new campus, a rolling suitcase behind her and a Yale hoodie tied around her waist. She turned at the dorm entrance, raised a hand in a half-wave, then disappeared into the crowd of other freshmen carrying their own invisible stories. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "She's really gone," she said. "I didn't think we'd live long enough to see this." "We did," Vincent said. "And she's not gone. She's expanding her jurisdiction." They walked back to the car in companionable silence. Back at the Harlow estate, the newly established Brennan Family Foundation occupied a refurbished wing of the old guest house. A simple brass plaque by the door read, "The Daniel Brennan Memorial Fund for Families in Crisis." Inside, staff members fielded calls from people whose lives had been derailed by accidents, illnesses, and court cases that looked disturbingly familiar. Eleanor, now executive director, moved through the office with a binder under her arm and a purpose in her step that chemo could never touch. On one of Vincent's visits, he paused in the doorway of a small meeting room. Through the glass, he saw a young girl sitting at the table with her mother. The girl's hands twisted in her lap. A shut-off notice peeked from the folder in front of them. They both looked like they hadn't slept properly in months. Across from them sat Sophie, home for the summer, a lanyard with a student ID hanging around her neck. She listened intently, pen poised, asking questions that went to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. Income gaps, medical bills, landlord threats. Her expression was serious, but not hopeless. "We can work with this," she was saying. "There are programs the hospital didn't tell you about, and we have a fund for the rent arrears. You're not alone in this." Not anymore. The girl looked up at her the way Sophie once looked at Vincent, like someone seeing the possibility of oxygen after too long underwater. Vincent stood there a moment longer, then stepped back, letting the scene play out without his shadow in the doorway. Eleanor joined him in the hall. "She's good at this," Eleanor said quietly. "She was born for this," Vincent replied. They walked toward the exit together. "You gave her back her future," Eleanor said, the words simple but heavy. "No," Vincent said, thinking of a yellow apron hanging on a hook, of a kitchen filled with soap bubbles and fear, of a courtroom he'd never been inside, but whose echo had shaped everything. "I just stopped stealing it. There's a difference." Eleanor smiled, lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "Then let's make sure no one else steals another child's future again," she said. They stepped out into the sunlight. Behind them, in the meeting room, Sophie leaned forward and slid a packet of information across the table to the frightened girl. "You're going to be okay," she said, voice steady with the kind of certainty you can only earn. "I promise." The girl glanced back once as she left, seeing Sophie framed in the doorway, that old yellow apron hanging on a decorative hook in the background. A relic, not a sentence. On the steps outside, Vincent, Eleanor, and Sophie came together, three silhouettes against the wide sky. Once, their lives had intersected only along the lines of paycheck and power. Now, they formed something new. A man who had spent 30 years looking backward at debts he couldn't pay. A woman who had been told her husband's life was worth a line item. A girl who had washed dishes in the dark to keep them both alive. The past hadn't changed. The scaffolding had still fallen. The court had still failed. The nights at the sink had still carved themselves into Sophie's bones. But as Vincent looked at the two people beside him, he understood something he'd missed for most of his life. Some debts are not meant to be settled with interest and signatures. They're meant to be paid forward, into scholarships, into hospital bills, into foundations and laws and late-night conversations that change the direction of someone else's story. And the future, he realized, wasn't an abstract thing waiting out there in a timeline he'd never see. The future was standing right next to him, alive, healthy, and ready to fight for every child still washing dishes in the dark. You've seen Sophie go from washing dishes in the dark to fighting for other families' futures. If you can watch that whole journey and just click away, you're doing exactly what everyone did when she was suffering in silence. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. And in the comments, tell me your favorite moment from this story. If a scene stayed with you, but you don't comment and subscribe, you're treating her fight like cheap entertainment.